I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and we're out here at the range today to talk to you guys about the X-Calibur. The X-Calibur is a handgun from Grand Power, and Grand Power is a company out of Slovakia. They import their handguns through Eagle Imports here in the U.S., and Eagle Imports was nice enough to send one of the Excaliburs out to us to try out. Now, this is chambered in 9mm, and it's really kind of more geared at the competition crowd. Now, obviously, we have a tack light mounted on it here, and that's simply because the holster that I'm running today requires me to actually have a tack light on it to be able to safely holster the weapon, and obviously that's a very important thing. We'll talk about holsters here in just a minute. Now, the X-Calibur is a single action, double action handgun, but as I mentioned before, it's designed really for competition shooters. And let's talk about some of the features on the X-Calibur from front to back. First of all, you will notice the muzzle up here is a fairly beefy muzzle. That's because this handgun utilizes a bull barrel. Now, the bull barrel, once we go ahead and move the slide back here, you can see has some really aggressive fluting in it. This is something that you really don't see on most production handguns. It's really something that you only see on higher end custom guns. We also have really aggressive fluting in the slide, or windows cut in the slide up here. Again, something that you generally only see on high-end custom handguns. And then some really aggressive slide cuts in the back here, which really allow you to get a nice tight purchase on the handgun. I was really happy to see all this slide work done, because what it ends up is being a handgun that's very easy to work with. If you want to press check the gun, it's very easy to grab those front slide serrations and roll the handgun over and check it. So very simple, very easy to work with. Coming back, you'll notice we have this big beefy slide release lever here, and we do have a slide release lever on both sides. This handgun is fully ambidextrous, which again is another really nice thing to see. Towards the back here, we have our safety levers, and this handgun does have the ability to be carried cocked and locked, so you can carry it in full single action mode should you wish to do so. The safety levers are a really interesting point on this gun. Grand Power actually sends out two sets of safety levers with the Excalibur, and they are end user changeable, so you can swap out the safety levers for whatever you want. Now, we have kind of a mixed configuration on the handgun right now. On the right side of the handgun, we have the smooth, almost flat safety lever. You can still manipulate it, but it's very low profile to the gun. Now, on the left-hand side of the gun here, we have the really big, wide competition type safety lever. And the reason I've done that is so that when I'm shooting, I can get my thumb up on that lever and it works like a gas pedal to hold it down. It's also much quicker to be able to get that safety off when you're coming up in single action mode out of the holster. One drawback that we did find about the safety, though, is that you'll see that it's really thick back here at the back, and the fulcrum point of the safety is right about here. So what we run into with this is getting it off is no problem at all, but when you go to put the safety back on, you have to kind of reach forward and up. It's very difficult just to swipe it on like you would on a 1911. So if we were hanging on to this gun, if this was my personal handgun, I would probably take a Dremel and take about half of this safety lever off and then reprofile it so that the paddle is just towards the front edge of the safety. That would still allow me to get a really good thumb grip on it and still allow me to exert some force downward on that safety lever while I was shooting. But that's a very, very minor issue, and because the safety levers are available separately, if you screw one up trying to modify it, it's very simple to get a replacement. Now, the trigger on the Grand Power is a fairly standard affair. It is single action or double action. What you get on the Grand Power is if you leave it hammer down, your first shot will be double action, which means pulling the trigger, cocks, and then releases the hammer. And then your second shot will be single action, and every shot thereafter will be single action until you run dry. The trigger pull on the Excalibur, the single action trigger pull, is a very nice light trigger pull. You can see you have a little bit of take up and then you hit the wall, and then the trigger breaks very cleanly, no problem at all. The one thing that I did not like was the double action trigger pull. I'm not a big fan of double action, single action handguns to begin with. I like to have one trigger pull on a handgun, no matter what shot I'm on in the magazine, if it's the first shot or the last shot. Now with the X-Calibur, you have a very, very long double action trigger pull. Also, the problem that you run into with the trigger is it is very far forward swept. Now, I do not have small hands, but when I get up here, I can just barely get the front pad of my finger on without really getting a long reach to get in there. And then obviously the angle that I'm engaging the trigger changes significantly as I come back. And what that can lead to is it can lead to pulling that first shot off to the side very often. So I would like to see a little bit shorter trigger pull on this handgun. In fact, I would prefer a handgun that starts closer in and finishes further back if they weren't able to change that actual trigger pull. But again, it's only the first shot if you run in double action mode, and also most of the time I think guys are going to want to run in single action mode unless the competition rules tell you you have to start in double action. Some shooting disciplines require that if you run a double action, single action handgun, you start on the buzzer in double action mode and then go from there. Now the sights are a place that I can really give the X-Calibur a thumbs up. They did a great job on the sights. You have a fiber optic front sight, and then you have a fully adjustable rear sight that really works well. Nothing crazy to adjust it. It just has flat blade adjustment. So it's very easy to carry a flat blade screwdriver in your bag, and if you run into a pinch, you can adjust it with the tip of your pocket knife. So really nice to see that. The sights were very fast to pick up in just about all lighting conditions. They are a little bit sharp, so you have to be careful that you don't snag yourself when you go down on the draw, but it didn't draw blood at any point in time while we were testing it. Now coming back down to the bottom of the handgun, you can see we do have a light rail on it, and we do have a Surefire X300 Ultra mounted. And if I pull this off here real quick, I'll tell you the light rail is fairly tight, so you don't have to worry about lights rattling around there, but once we get the light on, it locked in very well. It is just a single cross slot Glock type light rail, but it works very well. You would think that if they were really gearing this towards competition, they might omit the light rail, but the nice thing is they did not. So you can use this in a tactical type situation where you want to run a weapon mounted light. So kudos to them on that. Now I want to come back to probably one of the most novel features about this handgun, and that is the operating system in it. This is a recoil operated system, so it is a blowback system, but it utilizes a rotary locking barrel. Now normally if you have a system like a 1911 or a Glock or M&P, when you fire the handgun, to unlock, the barrel has to come back and drop down into the frame to get out of the way so that the slide can come back. Well, Grand Power took a little bit of a different route on this, and the barrel actually locks up in the slide through a rotary mechanism. There are lugs in the slide, and the barrel has helical cuts in it to allow it to lock up. So what you get is when your slide comes back, if you notice the hood of the barrel, instead of dropping down, it actually rotates. Now, there are some claimed advantages to this. One is that you get a little bit less whip. Secondly, they claim that you can run the bore of the handgun lower into the frame because the barrel doesn't have to drop down, so you don't have to leave extra room for it. Now, those are the claimed advantages. I can tell you in shooting it side by side with standard dropping block type handguns, I really couldn't notice a difference in the recoil, but it did function perfectly fine. We didn't have any issues with it at all. And one thing that we did notice though, Grand Power ships the X-Calibur with 3 different recoil springs, and we did notice that it does seem kind of picky on the ammunition that we used. Normally we run 147 grain 9mm from Freedom Munitions. That runs pretty well in just about every 9mm handgun we have. However, we found that the Grand Power, no matter what spring we put in it, did not like that. The X-Calibur just didn't want to lock back on an empty magazine with any of the springs that they included. We switched over to some regular Federal 115 grain full metal jacket 9mm, and that seems to function just fine. So it just may be a matter of finding ammunition that the handgun likes, and you'll run into that with quite a few different handguns out there. Now, tearing down the handgun is a little bit difficult. To disassemble the handgun, you pull it all the way back and you disengage the little lever here, and then that clears a block that allows you to move the slide back just a little bit further, and you lift the slide off the back and slide it forward. I'm not going to do it for you here on camera because it is very, very fiddly to do it, and it's a little bit difficult to get it back together because you have this guide rod that you have to line up inside the slide, and it can take a couple of minutes to get it back together. There are definitely some easier handguns to disassemble and reassemble out there on the market, but you're not going to be doing that every time you head out to the range, so not a real big deal. It's not something that you have to do quickly. It does come apart without the use of tools, and that's the main feature, and you can get it back together, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, but after you practice it, it shouldn't be a problem at all. Now, finally, one last thing on the barrel on the X-Calibur. I'm not quite sure why they put fluting in this big bull barrel, if for any other reason than just aesthetics. I don't know if they were trying to make a certain weight limit for a certain class, or what the end goal was there. But I think as far as handling of the handgun, it would have been better to skeletonize the slide like this, but leave the barrel its standard thickness and get rid of the flutes. That would have put some more weight up towards the muzzle of the handgun. It really would have assisted in the handling a little bit. Now, this does recoil fairly flat. It's really not a big deal at all. In fact, I really wish it would have functioned well and locked back on the last round on the 147s, because shooting it with the 147s in it, the handgun shot very flat and very quickly. Punching up to the 115s, you get a little bit more recoil out of the 115 grain ball ammo, but still, it shot fairly flat, shot fairly good. The sight tracked back down onto target really well. So overall, a nice handgun. I would have no problem with running this in competition. Now, unfortunately, we did not run it in any competitions while I've had it here for the T&E, because they only sent along 2 magazines. The Grand Power X-Calibur does come with 2 15-round magazines, which also is somewhat curious because they're just metal magazines, and the competition generally runs 17-round magazines in the full-size pistols. So I would like to have seen them work and put a couple of extra rounds in here. I'm not sure if there are any other magazines that are cross-compatible with this. We really didn't get a response on that question, and at this point I don't know if there's anyone that's making any kind of base plates for the handgun. So that's something to keep in mind. We also don't have any information right now on what the magazine pricing is. We'll try to get that before we send this to press. Now, finally, I will mention the holster issue. Grand Power does have a couple of companies that make holsters, but the selection and the types of holsters are very limited. For this evaluation, we weren't able to get a custom Kydex holster manufactured in enough time to get it out here, which is obviously the easiest option, because then you can get the holster made to exactly what you want. For our test here, we are utilizing a Blackhawk Omnivore holster, and for the Omnivore you have to have a Surefire X300 Ultra or a Streamlight TLR1 on your handgun, because the holster actually locks on to the light itself. So when you stick it in there, it locks on the light. If you didn't have a light on the handgun, then it would not lock. We are going to do a separate review on the holster itself. We've used this with quite a few different handguns, and that's the beauty of it is, as long as you can mount an X300 on it, more than likely the handgun will fit in the holster. So the Omnivore has worked really well, especially for this evaluation. Overall, the Grand Power X-Calibur is a fairly nice, high-quality handgun. I've been fairly satisfied with it once we figured out what ammunition it liked. Now, the handguns now are on the open market for around $800. The MSRP is a little bit higher than that. Unfortunately, in the $800 price range, there's some pretty stiff competition from brands that have been out there that are at the top of the field in their competitions. So it's really an uphill battle for a company like Grand Power to get their handguns up on the podium. I would have no problem at this point taking this out and shooting it in the competition, assuming that I could get enough magazines. I usually shoot Steel Challenge, and Steel Challenge normally requires about 5 magazines since you run 5 strings of fire in a row. Without 5 magazines, it makes it very difficult for me to actually shoot this in a match without tying things up and making trouble for other shooters. So that we didn't, but we did run a couple of training days with it. We really didn't run into any malfunctions with it after we actually figured out what ammunition it liked. So if you like the double action, single action type, and you are willing to put up with a couple of the issues, and you want a handgun that you can replace the back straps and fit it perfectly to your hand, then check out the Grand Power X-Calibur. If you guys would like to know more, please go ahead and click the link below to our blog entry. Check out the review on our website. We'll also leave a link to Grand Power's website where you can check out the full specs on the handgun. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next time, get out and shoot.